It's Comics from the Ark with Devin, me, Jeff, for the week of June 26th, 2024.
Yeah,
And
I think
we're
that's right.
going to discuss comics. And along the way, we'll probably get off topic and we'll bring up a lot of other pop culture, geeky stuff. Bear with us. There will be a point to it eventually. We just have to take the scenic route. So, what do you got this week?
Um, well, before we get to the books, a couple big things that we have going on. Store has Jason Font coming in on July 19th, going to be doing some signing and stuff. Really excited about that one. And then,
You might want to explain who he is for the people who aren't familiar.
okay, if you're unfamiliar, we are talking about the Time Force Ranger. And he also was, I believe the name was Leon, was the main character's name in the Resident Evil that I think he voiced it, and I'm not sure, but possibly modeled for like movement and stuff as well. Um,
So the one of the Red Power
yeah,
Rangers.
Red Ranger. I think it was 2003 or something like that. And then there's been some other times where they brought the Time Force Rangers back in, and they've obviously used him again for that. Um, Also, you see it in the books, even recently. I mean, granted, it's just cameo type stuff right now, but like number I think it was like 115 or 116. There's a big splash page in the middle of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers that actually had a full set of Rangers, and the Time Rangers were part of that. And so
Nice.
you're starting to see that, and then there was a trade paperback real recently as well. So anyway, yeah, we've got him on July 19th. And then on August 4th, we have Sam J. Jones coming in, which is Flash Gordon, and I'm pretty excited about that one as well. Um, it's really hard to decide what to have signed on that one. It just because I mean you're talking two iconic things, as far as things that I was really into. Number one as a child with Flash Gordon. Number two as an adult with Ted. So and it's just going to be fun for that as well.
I know he doesn't sound excited, but you can't tell how excited he is because he's sitting down right now.
Oh yeah. Well, it is. It's a pretty big deal to me. To be all in all honesty, um, Sam Jones is probably in my top five that shaped me as a child. Unfortunately, some of them have passed, and I will never be able to meet them. A good example of that is Paul Rubin. Um, I mean, the humor that came out of him with Pee Wee Herman, and still to this day the most iconic death scene in any movie ever. Um, it's
Yes.
just amazing. Um, up to and including, you watch his like I think it was off Broadway is where they did his stage show, but it was Pee Wee's Playhouse for You Grew Up. All the innuendo was taken up about three or four notches. So
So how did Sam Jones influence you?
Sam Jones had a lot of influence because obviously you have the Flash Gordon movie, which I mean, the idea of Flash Gordon is what you know a lot of kids look to want to be. You you presented yourself with confidence. You presented yourself with courage. You didn't back down. You always stood up for what was right when it was time to stand up for what was right. It's the same way that it's for the reason that Sam J. Jones is on my list is the same reason that D. Snyder makes my list. Because like I spoke last week. I may not agree with everything he says, but the man is more American than most people I know, to be quite honest. And there's something to be learned from that. You stand up for what you believe is right, and you see that in Flash Gordon. Um, so many different times, somebody thrown into a completely foreign situation, adapting, coping quickly, and realizing what all is on the line, and being able to basically, have the chutzpah to stand up and be up to the task. Um, which a lot of it has to do with not so much always natural ability, but just the courage to try it, the courage to go out there and say, you know what, I'm gonna do this. And I think you brought up the stump scene specifically
Oh
when we were
God,
talking about
that
the
thing caused me so much anxiety as a child. I had nightmares about that stump scene where you would put your hand in there.
yeah, but the fact that they did so, knowing it was a very Doc Holliday type feel. It was a game for blood. And but you had to have a certain level of, even if it wasn't the most intelligent courage in general to be able to do that.
Not the most intelligent courage.
It's what you have to do when you have to do it. I mean, a good example of that is um going back to my previous life for a comic book store. When I was in the military, I got to disarm things, and it was kind of like reaching into the stump, basically. I chose to do so, and so I knew that there was an end reason why I did everything I did, in the risks that were taken in what I had to do. And the same thing was there. I mean, there had to be, that had to happen for everything to continue to fall into place. For him to be able to muster what was needed to stand up against the merciless.
Right, he had to prove himself
Mm-hmm.
in order to gain allies.
Exactly. And to do so, you've got to show that you have the courage to do that which would make most men run away in fear.
I guess for me, it's always the I would rather, fight the devil you do know versus the devil you don't know. That type
Yeah.
of, and the not knowing. That's more the triggering, not the something could bite my hand. It's not knowing if it was going to be my hand or his hand. Is it going to be my finger? Or is it going to be my thumb? Just it was a
Yeah.
lot of that,
Very Russian roulette.
and that didn't sit well with me then, and honestly, it probably wouldn't sit well with me now.
See, for me, that movie was just, it was one of those. There was two movies I would watch just over and over again from the early '80s, and one was Flash Gordon, and the other was Time Bandits. And I get the same thing from other people on Time Bandits. Like, how can you deal with this portion or that portion? And honestly, both of them, beginning to end, I don't know why it just has meshed with my personality and what I viewed life as. It worked for me.
I watched the movie 9 to 5, absurdly amount, a lot for a child, and that would have, if we're talking like top two movies as a kid, that was one of the movies I watched
Yeah,
nonstop with 9 to 5.
I still love that
I
the
I,
fact
I
that
honestly don't think that I'm going to become Dabney Coleman or Jane Fonda or any of these characters, but it was fun to watch.
yeah, yeah. Well, and then you have fun to watch, and then you have the characters you look up to. Another good example of the one I'd look up to was I hope I'm not screwing up who played it, but Christian Slater in Pump Up the Volume.
Okay.
Um, the the idea that you can go out and speak your mind, and even if it gets tough, to continue to do so. Continue to exercise your right to be and to speak, you know. And that's what you learn. What I've learned, I learned from, you know, Flash Gordon, D. Snyder, Pump Up the Volume, Time Bandits. You know, these are, you know, definitive shaping moments of my youth that, you know, now I'm getting to recapture years and years later. So
You know, for me, I've always kind of, as a child, I always wanted to be the type of adult that it was like Harry on Night Court. You know, it was the funny, goofy, silly guy that was passionate and caring and trying to do the right thing, but interject fun along the way.
mhm.
And I have found later that a lot of that was because it was Harry Anderson. You know, he wasn't acting; he was just playing himself
Yeah,
as a judge. You know, and so
it's kind of like a Harold Ramis type thing.
right,
Yeah.
and so one of those things where I'm not sure if it was consciously or not, but I kind of developed along those lines. And
Hmm.
like Paul Rubens, I'll never get the opportunity to meet Harry Anderson, but I
Yeah.
did base a lot of my development on that type of character because to me, that seemed to be the perfect mesh of fun, caring, smart, and doing the right thing. You know.
Yeah. Well, and that makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of the reason that Paul Rubens makes my list. When you look at the rest of the people on my list, it's like, how does Pee Wee Herman fit in there? Pee Wee Herman was vitally important to that. You had a genuine soul that, you know, cared so much for those around him, you know, and yet showed on a regular basis that it was okay to be yourself, no matter how awkward or weird or, you know, how much you're looked at oddly. You're allowed to do that, and you can laugh those people off. You know, that's what I got from him. You know, and it comes a little bit from, you know, going back to like the Flash Gordon stuff. You don't always win putting your hand in the stump, you know, to be quite honest. There's the same thing applies to, you know, even the basics of, hell, at that age, you know, I was dealing with, okay, how do I ask her if she will go to the Dairy Queen with me, you know, and man, that was jumping a mountain.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, that took some work. And when you got rejected and you got laughed at, what Paul Rubens had taught me was it was okay, because guess what? You go laugh it off too. Maybe you get to see the humor in what you did, kind of funny, and you try again later.
right. Well, and I'm not so bored that I'm checking my phone while you're
Yeah,
talking.
yeah,
I'm trying to find a quote because I always go back to this quote.
yeah.
And for the life of me now, I'm not finding it. Haha, that proves me. Um, Jean-Luc Picard. It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That's not a weakness. That is life.
Yeah,
And so I always kind of took some of his approach
yeah.
to mine. You know, the diplomacy and, you know, again, trying to do the right thing. And if you can't do it by following the book, you know, find a way to make it work.
Well, and sometimes, like you said there, sometimes you just get bested.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. You know, it's even though if you're the baddest guy on the block, are you the baddest guy in the town? Are you the baddest guy in the county? You know, there's always somebody smarter, somebody badder, somebody stronger, you know, whatever the case is. And you know, the person that's at that pinnacle, they're they're probably missing something else where they're the underdog.
Right.
So you gotta look at the entirety that way.
Well, and I growing up, uh, I really felt like Grover kind of best personified me as a child.
Mm.
Kind of neurotic, but playful and kind and what have you. Um, and was there, it wasn't always the most stable,
Yeah.
but was at least there, As I got older, I started getting a little more complex, and I said that when I'm confident, I am Gonzo, and when I'm not confident, I'm Fozzie,
Yeah.
and that's my duality, and it's amazing how well the Muppets kind of summed up a lot of my, right there with Harry Anderson,
Yeah.
everything that Jim Henson tried to talk about
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
really bled through to me.
Even as a child, though, I really identified with the. Uh,
Crazy Harry.
no,
Did
no,
nobody say
no. Don't get me
dynamite?
wrong. Don't get me wrong. I kind of ended up that direction, but no, Statler and
Waldorf.
Waldorf. Yep, those guys. For some reason, I, I just always felt that, man. It's like I was shaking my cane at like age 10 almost. It feels like.
Boy, they work together. The snowman's ice cold and the bear's not so hot.
Yep.
Oh!
Oh god. But anyway,
So
so yeah,
Sam
a lot of
Jones.
yeah, we have a lot of stuff going on this summer. At this point, we're getting we're getting geared up for everything, and
And it's going to
so
be, well, and if these characters ever touched you, not physically, that is wrong. But if these characters ever had any profound moment on you, or if you ever think about something that you saw or witnessed or learned from them along the way, come out, meet these people, and truly just recapture that moment. You'll be amazed at how that memory will just spark to life the moment you're there.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I've been real excited watching some of the responses and some of the messages I've been receiving, with people that are just excited to recapture that little bit of their childhood just for a moment.
Right.
So speaking of which, same concept with my book for the week. I did Grommets. They came out with the second issue of it finally. I've been really waiting for this. It's that mid '80s skater book
Okay.
that I read about a month ago now. Um,
Probably more
weird.
like a month and a half,
Yeah.
but
I think it's a monthly. Yeah. So anyway, point is, we ended the last issue. They went to the skate park, and his new friend that took him there, ended up not quite being as good as they were expecting, as he had laid out to be and stuff. So they pick up this one kind of like that's all past. Now they're buddies, and they're kind of moving forward, and
the scar has developed, along the way as friends. And
well, it doesn't feel like it's too far in the future, but it was far enough that his lip had healed from the face plant at the end of the first issue, that type thing. Um, Number two picks up, and I tell you what, it's beginning to end. It is the child of the '80s book. There is so much imagery in this that is nostalgic and just takes you right back. The way that they drew the Taco Bell in this is absolutely amazing. It went back to remember the old brown and orangish?
yep, yep.
Yep. They have it absolutely just almost perfect in there.
Where like all the windows were rounded off, and
It's outstanding. And they're talking about they're going to go skating, but they're going to go by Taco Bell first, and basically how'd they put it? The diarrhea special. Um,
diarrhea, cha cha cha,
yeah.
diarrhea.
But yeah, remember how they had like the little wood
Oh
pillars and
my
everything,
god, yes.
and so they're at the Taco Bell, and they end up. And initially, it starts out they want to order one of everything. They realize that that ain't happening, so they get the basics, and three skater girls show up. And, the two of them obviously try to hook up with them and stuff, and one thing leads to another, and they do end up skating together for the day. And yet again, it's just another nostalgic run through the town. You know, they go up to a parking garage and they do a speed run down the garage. And to be honest, probably about same time frame, mid '80s. I remember doing that in Cheyenne, Wyoming, because there was the hospital parking garage you could do that on. Or the worst idea of them was if we couldn't get out there to mess around and stuff, there was this huge overpass just outside my hometown in Pine Bluffs, Wyoming. And you'd come down the backside of that thing, and you'd pick up enough speed, you'd hit a rock, and I'm like watching the falls and the way they're drawing falls in this book, and I'm feeling it just like I'm a kid again. And it's
We
like,
had wildly different
oh,
childhoods.
I feel the pain. Like they show one where he was basically riding down a uh, what are the like the parking concrete parking curbs.
Like the
Yeah, a
barrier.
little barrier parking thing. Yeah, they'd wax the top of it, and they were railing it kind of. And they show one where, and it's not like they show anything grotesque or anything like that with it, but they just show the tailbone hitting the concrete, and I'm like, I felt that because I remember doing that. It made me tense for a minute. Um,
When you get a real world reaction out of something fictional, that's how you know you made your connection.
Yeah, well, and that's what this book is about, I think. Well, I mean, we're hard character development, but this number two was just it was nothing but a run of nostalgia through mid '80s. If you grew up in the mid '80s, this is going to just take you back. You're gonna smell things, you're gonna taste things, just by checking out what's in the book. It's well done. The art is really good. Um, the character development's coming along well. I'm not sure where we're going story wise, because it's kind of this kind of here and there, and then I mean that you end the book with they get done skating and security guard at the parking garage basically is giving them crap and the one kid's coming down and he gets his foot right in front of his board and he ends up eating crap right out in front of the security guard, and one of the girls comes up and just cold cocks him upside the head with the board and stuff like that, because he basically all but concussed the kid,
Oh, hit
when
the guard.
yeah he hit the guard, yeah.
I
Yeah, no, not the kid. Like basically, it's like it makes a comment about this is what it's like to be concussed, just like knocks teeth out and everything, and they go out and they're kind of you can tell they're kind of trying to play the Black Flag slash Ramones type punk feel with the way they're addressing things, and they end up flipping off some rednecks in a pickup truck, and they're getting chased around and everything. And while they're getting chased, he's thinking about what. And by the way, it's the three gens. It's Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen with two N's. Okay, so
Ed and Eddie.
yeah, pretty much. Um, well, wasn't there what? This is my. Hi, I'm Daryl. This is my brother Daryl. This is my other brother Daryl.
My name is Larry.
Oh, Larry, Daryl. Yep, that's right. But anyway, he's thinking about, she'd made a comment. It's like, oh, I just, he's going to feel in the morning, but he'll be fine. And, so they end up having to run from these rednecks because they done pits him off. And they're like trying to run him over, basically. And he ends up jumping over the concrete barrier back over kind of where the guard was standing. He looks kind of in front of him, and there's a pool of blood with like 3 teeth laying in it. And, he's like, ugh, I don't, okay in the morning type thing. And so you're seeing a little bit of, you know, he's all about being it, but he doesn't want to necessarily cause other people injury. So, it's kind of an interesting look on it there. And there's a side story with one of the gens that she may have chopped her father's head off and burned the house down, and that's the gen that cold cocked the guard too, that story's
The
about.
psycho. Gotcha.
Yeah, you know. So, like I said, story wise, it's got a good trajectory. It just I'm not sure where we're headed with an overall arc, but nostalgia level, 100% in. I like the base storyline. I like the fact that it's not doing anything real wild right now. It's staying real basic to the
Like a real life story.
yeah. It's the mid 1980s skate culture.
So maybe this miniseries will end and the kid will become a comic book artist and will draw this comic called Grommets.
Yeah, something, yeah. But
Full circle.
yeah, exactly. So no, I really do recommend it, and especially okay, to be honest with you, if you're in your 50s, this is a definite must read because you're going to recognize so many things that I mean, I'm recognizing some of the boards they're drawing. I had friends that had these exact boards.
So why do you think it's called Grommets?
Oh, it has to do with the trucks. There's grommets in the trucks that help when you're tightening your trucks down, there's the rubber grommets that are in there that you're basically squeezing against, and it has to do with how tight your trucks get and how hard you squeeze in on that grommet because that can't be just metal on metal.
Trucks?
Um, Excuse us just a moment while I show him.
Sorry, not everybody in the 80s was in the skater culture.
Truck.
Ah,
It's basically the axles and the connecting
and the
piece to the
shock
deck.
and
Yeah, well, there's no shock. The grommet's the closest thing to a shock you get, and it's basically a chunk of rubber that's at the
it
pivot
gives that a
point.
little bit of resistance.
Now it keeps it from being metal on metal mostly.
All right. So you're recapturing your youth and
Yeah, yeah, it's good. And like I said, as far as being able to see the Taco Bell was amazing. The Taco Bell application even looked legit. It looked like it came out of one of those what is stenographs.
yeah.
Yeah. So, um, I do recommend it. I recommend definitely starting with number one because the character development you get for the guys is kind of important on that because you get to kind of see the starting point, but now you're seeing that okay, there is some talent there. It's just maybe they were up talking themselves just a little bit. It wasn't
Right.
terrible. Um, so
Which kids will end up doing and eventually
oh
they'll level off to where they say they are.
yeah, exactly. So anyway, and it looks like you went
I went
not Marvel.
independent this week.
Yep.
This was actually a big week as far as number of titles that I got at 9. But when I really went through everything, nothing really jumped out at me as something that's like, oh my god, I can't wait to read this, or like I got to know what happens. So I decided to go with the number one that I picked up. It's called Dungeons and Dimwits. It was an independent book. The premise is you have this group of guys playing D&D, and they show them actually playing. You can see where their characters walk into town, and the little blurbs where it says, you walk into town and you hear a clap of thunder and all the details that a DM
Mm-hmm.
would give you, and that's all your panel work. It's showing it, and then you hear the DM telling you what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and along the way, you see all the classic tropes of role playing. You have the one guy that always plays a female character.
Yeah.
You have the other guy who hits on the character that is female that's played by
Mm-hmm.
a guy. It's like, hey, how about we go to the
Yeah.
tavern and then hit the inn.
Oh
And,
yeah. Yeah.
and
Like on Darkness Rising, where he's like, "I totally seduced you," and everybody's looking at the two of them like,
you have the one character that's like, "Come on, guys, let's focus on the mission. We got to do this because something's gonna happen."
Yeah.
And so you hit all those marks, and you recognize that you can almost point to the person and say, "Oh, that's so and so and so and so that I
Mhm.
used to play with." And eventually they show the guys as they're sitting around the table with the paper, the pencils, the dice, and
Oh, so it does kick in and out of the. That sounds real similar to. Have you ever seen Darkness Rising?
some of it.
Yeah, it's very similar to that because they do kind of the same thing. They show the real life and then they show the fantasy world.
But the premise of this is they actually get pulled into the imaginary world that they're playing
Okay,
in.
so this is like the old D&D cartoon, kind of
Kind of,
ish,
uh,
with a new twist.
with the twist that this is already the world that the DM had made up, and the characters were playing characters in. They are now inhabiting that world in real life.
And in the characters that they had created.
Right, yes.
Okay, so they've been playing their characters, so they're familiar with what their characters can
Right,
do.
and so now they are their characters.
Oh, just out of curiosity, what's the publisher on that?
It's Dren or Gren?
Okay.
Dren, Dren publications.
Oh, that's awesome.
But this, it could be the very first book from that because this is produced or published by Dren Publication or Productions. First edition, copyright 2022.
Mm.
This book came out this week, but it's copyrighted from 2022.
Yeah.
So apparently this is a self-produced book because the artist is also the writer. The credits for this is very small. They're like 5 people. You
Yeah.
had one person who wrote and drew it, another one that did the inking and coloring, and then you had someone do the cover.
Yeah.
It's a group of friends that did this. You could just tell.
Well, yeah, and there's another one that I know of getting off the ground right now. If y'all go out and look it up, called Smoke and Gun Comics, and it's same thing. It's a group of friends that have known each other for years, and well since high school, and I've known one of them since back then as well. And there's stories that probably should never be told, but you know,
We
but
all have that friend.
they're doing their startup now on Kickstarter, so and I love seeing these smaller companies starting to kick up, the independents coming back around. It feels like that kind of late 80s time frame again, where we had like we had First Comics, we had
Comico.
yeah, Comico was out there, Pacific Comics.
Eclipse.
I mean, Eclipse. I mean, there was so many, and there was some great, great work in all of them. And I'm loving that we're seeing that again.
Well, all of that said, I read this entire thing, and I'm interested in where it's going, but not deeply invested.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm curious to see, because again, it's you hit all the tropes. You had the DM do something, and then someone calls out the DM. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Tell you what, I'll continue playing if you can make this work. And then the DM's like, oh well, I'm making it harder now because you're an asshole. Yeah. And so there was some of that going on.
8x8. Yeah.
So, from that standpoint, it was very recognizable because who hasn't been a part of that party? There is no ad in the book. There is an ad on the back cover where you can scan a QR code and see other things that Dren will be eventually putting out.
Oh, nice.
That's the only advertisement in the whole thing. So,
what's interesting about that, you said there's no other ads in it whatsoever.
oh, and then coming soon, Amazon Women of Inner Earth, also from Dren. So you're not going to find a Gatorade ad or.
What's crazy about that is it makes it very close to something that could be media mail, because that's one of the reasons you can't send like Marvel Comics and stuff through media mail is advertising.
So, but the advertising is also what makes it cheaper.
Yeah.
Now that I did not find a price tag on the cover, on the back, inside the book, there is no price to be found on this book. I actually had to look it up. It is $5.99.
Okay. Which is about where Marvel seems to be settling.
It,
Right?
well, it's $4.99 for Marvel. You know,
I don't know. I've been seeing some unique directions on that one.
but anyway,
I mean, how many
for
9.99s have we had in the last month?
yeah, but if you look at how many books they put out in the course of a month, if you average them all out, it's probably still going to be on the lower end. All of that said, it's an independent book from a publisher no one's ever heard of. It's got kind of a quaint homespun art style to it, a little chibi. Um, and it wasn't bad or distracting. Very clean lines. I liked that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, was it worth $6? I really didn't feel like I got that value out of it. Now it could be that the next book, once we've established characters and premise and what have you, that could be where the story really begins.
Mm-hmm.
But for a first issue, it's kind of a steep commitment.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, to be fair, let's go ahead and let's step away from Dren specifically, and let's take a look at, and we're gonna eliminate the Spawn universe from this conversation altogether because of how that's handled. They always are doing that 2.99. I think the worst we've seen from them is like 3.99 for something, but for the most part, they're almost always 2.99. Now you get into most anything else with your number ones, especially if you're going into Marvel. You get 4.99 is your best case scenario. More often than not, it's 5.99, 6.99 at that point for that Marvel book for the number one issue, and that's with advertising in the book. So I guess what I'm looking at is when you're looking at a comparison of a number one issue to a number one issue, maybe the bang for the buck is there. It's just with the unknown, it makes it more questionable for you.
well, and with Marvel or DC or any
Mm-hmm.
of the larger publishing companies, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of artists where you're like, how are they getting paid to do this? Where did they think they got their talent from? That type of thing. But the difference between an independent publisher and one of the big companies will always be the inker.
Yeah.
For the person who gives it shading and depth and makes it look almost three-dimensional. That's always the difference maker for me.
Yeah.
A lot of the independent publishers, you can tell that it's supposed to be three-dimensional, but it's like, okay, I can see what they're doing here. It's still two-dimensional, but I can see what they're doing. And with this, they don't even really do a whole lot of the shading tricks to it.
It look yeah it's a flatter artwork. It's
Right.
it's more like a
Comic strip.
comic strip, or like maybe like a, it has like an early 2000 anime feel to it.
I can see that too.
Yeah, kind of like just the kind of flat without getting a whole lot of depth to the surroundings or anything.
Um, and as you pointed out, there was the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon of the '80s.
Yeah.
We also had Die, and that was from Image.
Yes.
Both of those stories were wonderful stories of people getting pulled into their fictional role-playing world. In the case of the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, it wasn't really the world that they were playing in.
Yeah.
They went on an amusement park ride and got pulled into that fictional world. Um, so this is the twist that is a comedy. And like I said, they hit some of the tropes, and you can kind of feel like you can relate to it because you've been there. But
Yeah.
the comedy wasn't quite there.
Yeah, well, and if you look at if you compare the flat art to flat art, really that's the Saturday Morning Adventures, Dungeons and Dragons that's being produced by IDW has that same flat artwork.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, and on the other side of the house with kind of the different versions of being sucked into the world and stuff. Even at that, even if you look back at the original '80s cartoon, um, it did the same exact thing with the same tropes. The only difference was it was more of the Jumanji take on it, where yes, you had to deal with the ramifications of the character, but it didn't mean that you understood the character.
Right.
So it was still addressed. It was just done in a different way, and to be honest, it does. It's more of a Jumanji feel.
Yes. Whereas the original Dungeons and Dragons did it first, though. That's my only thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I'm looking at it to be able to bring it forward, in case people haven't watched the cartoon.
Fair enough. But if you haven't, you should. It's
Yeah.
amazing cartoon. So ahead of its time, and looking back at it, I'm surprised that it really did take off, because it was so different from everything else that was coming out that was based on video games. They had a Pac-Man cartoon and a Donkey Kong cartoon, or you had something that was based on a toy line. This was
Littles, I think we're right about that time.
this was
Smurfs.
a little more sophisticated. It wasn't happy-go-lucky. There was, no one ever got seriously injured, but
Yeah.
if
Trying
felt
to
like
remember
they
what
could
year
have.
it started.
I want to say it was like 82.
Okay, so it would have been a couple years before like some of your real edgier ones like
Right.
Pee-wee's Playhouse and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah. This would have been more the time of we were watching a lot more of like Herculoids and
The, one of my other favorites from that time period was Thundar the Barbarian, which again was a dark cartoon for the time period.
Yeah.
Earth was destroyed, the moon's broken in half, and everybody died off, and Earth was reborn, and then you had magic and science, and you had these monsters, and Jack Kirby had actually helped develop the cartoon,
Mm-hmm.
and it was such a beautiful cartoon, and it really gave my imagination an upkick, where you could say, well, this is nice and this is good, but eventually this will fall apart, and you have to have something more resilient, like nature is,
Mm-hmm.
and you could talk about how if something isn't documented and someone comes across it,
Yeah.
like if in 1,000 years, if some archaeologist comes across Disney World, they're gonna think, oh well, they were people that believe in this mouse god, and you had this whole pantheon of animal creatures that were gods,
Yeah.
and they'll come up to weird stories with it, and that's what Thundar was. These people didn't know the history, and so just looking at context, they were trying to come up with a story that
Yeah.
worked. And you look at how we live our lives, and then you go, my God, are we actually, zombies to our phone, or whatever?
Well, it's the same concept of if you go through the time to actually write down the description and make it a description to where you can't identify what you're talking about exactly, and you hand your D&D party a fully loaded and cocked AR-15, and you describe to them this long black stick, that has these different things. It's the same thing as if you gave them a blender with power. Eventually, one of them is going to put their hand in there and hit a button.
Right.
It's inevitable. So, and it's the same. It's the same thing. Just whether you bring something from the future backwards or you bring something from the past forwards, it's probably not going to be fully understood. I mean, the Sphinx is a good example of that. The hell, we still have no idea on that thing, if I remember right. Right?
Well, we're located in Walnut, Iowa, and Um, I remember as a kid coming to town. My mom and grandpa used to antique shop all the time, and I remember that a lot of the stores always had this long wooden. It was like a bow for like a animal,
Mm-hmm.
but it just had like
Like for
three metal
auction.
rings on it. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a smaller version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was basically a varnished piece of wood with three metal rings on it. And, they always had some outrageous price on it. It's like, yeah, but who knows what this would have been used for anymore? I have like, can you explain to me how this was used on livestock or for pulling
Mm-hmm.
your cart or whatever?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, no, they could not. It's like, okay, I have this piece, and I can tell you that it's antique farm equipment type stuff, but I can't tell you how they used it. And so
Yeah.
something's getting lost along the way.
Well, it's because you have too many people that took courses in small business management and stuff like that, and they've opened the stores, based on market research and etc. Versus because this and which makes sense because the second one doesn't work near as easy, which is the people that are like, for example, my wife is a anthropologist. She actually has her degree. you know um, she didn't go the archaeology route, she went the anthropology route, and because of that, she's very well versed in what a lot of what they talk about in the comics and with what we see come into the story, when we're looking at different things from different eras, and whereas I was going to college after I got out of the military. I was one kind of wanted to be a history teacher, and I kind of zeroed in on some areas of history and things like that. So, same thing, at least I know what's going on.
Right.
And I find that there's far fewer people that want to take the time and learn about what they're seeing, and far more that would rather just be able to take their phone, use Google image search, and realize that, oh, that's $50, oh, that's $60, oh, that but they're not looking at what the name of it is even. They're just looking at what they can charge for it.
So, and how much of that is passion on your part versus either
OCD.
there are people out there that are motivated by money, and what would be the easiest way for me to achieve that?
Mm-hmm.
I can go to a garage sale and I can buy all the junk that nobody wants because it's really old and nobody knows what it is, and I can call it an antique and sell it at a huge profit.
Yeah.
Versus the people who are like, my God, I remember I had this toy or such and such game or this book, and they're sharing that passion.
Yeah. Well, it seems weird to me because you said it yourself. You would ask about it and they wouldn't know, and I'm sure that would affect your want to purchase it at that point. Because I mean, if you can't be told something about it, why are you going to want to have it?
Right.
If you can't make a connection to it.
For a very long time, I always kicked around, how cool it'd be if I had my own comic book store. That
Yeah.
was always one of those things that floated around my head. However, I'm not big into all of the gaming aspects. I play Dungeons and
Yeah.
Dragons, but I'm not into Magic, Pokemon, or anything else. And
No Dark
so,
Angels.
right. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if I open a comic book shop, do I sell these items that I know nothing about? And then, prove that I don't know anything about it? Or do I focus primarily on comic books and hope that that's enough to continue operating?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, a lot of that was why I never even took the initial steps, because in my mind, you know, I didn't want to delve into something that I didn't have a passion about, magic and so
Yeah.
forth, just so that I can continue to sell the one thing that I do like.
Well, that was one thing that don't get me wrong. I definitely I started gaming far before ever getting out of high school or anything. I was I was taken under the wing of a few of the older kids, quote unquote. I think they were like in eighth grade at the time. When I was like in fifth or sixth grade or something like that.
The big kids.
Oh yeah, they let me come play. Well, we were playing GURPS. I think it was. It was either GURPS or Paranoia, one of the two.
God, paranoia. I
And
love paranoia.
that was my introduction to gaming right there. And so I played on and off with them through until they all graduated stuff, and then I kind of forgot about it for a little bit. I mean, I kept grabbing my books and buying my comics and reading those and stuff. But once I joined the military, I found there was a distinct gaming community in the military itself. Actually.
Really?
Oh yeah. First base I was at, we had a weekly group. We met on Friday nights shortly after we got off work, and we would play until we face planted, which was usually Sunday sometime. Um, and we were playing AD&D at the time, because I mean that was the current one out,
Right.
and I very quickly just kind of, because of the military, once you start playing with the gaming groups and stuff, you very quickly get into the board games and into Magic and so on. The only one I didn't get in until much later was the Warhammer, and it makes sense now why I didn't, because there would just been way too much to move around with it, because there's so many figurines, so much building, and it's not really the time that it takes to do it as much as the space it takes up. And if you're moving all the time, that's very difficult.
I started in high school. I had a friend that went on to become a civil engineer. So I mean, you can imagine the maps that he drew. Um,
Yeah.
but he had created his own system, and he took from D&D, and he took from the Bible, and he took from pop culture, and he made his own system, and it was very fluid.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't rightfully tell people that I play D&D because you know I later did try to play D&D with people, and some of the rules were different enough that it's like, you need to explain this to me, like,
Yeah.
and so there was a distinct difference between that homemade, independent. We called it roaming. We were roaming,
Yeah.
and then there's playing D&D. They were very distinctive. But then from there, we played Paranoia. We played the Star Wars role playing game. We dabbled into a lot of different things, and you could go from there. And I went to a gaming convention in Des Moines with some friends, and they had a miniature game, and I don't know what the game was, but I remember them. Everybody had their own tape measure, and they were measuring out distances and what have you. And I thought that was way too complicated. It's like you were missing
Yeah.
the imaginative part of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was never my thing, but I
Yeah.
was fascinated by the figurines and how they took a lot of time to put those together or paint them. And with Warhammer and
Mm-hmm.
so forth, I can appreciate it.
Well, and what I
It's
love about
not in my
yeah.
wheelhouse, so.
Well, and what I love about the way that Warhammer handles, well, Games Workshop and all of their tournaments versus, for example, like Magic or Laura Connor and the others, is Warhammer. Yes, there's always a tournament champion that just has the most points for wins, absolutely. But there's always that second, like if at like a lot of the golden ticket tournaments, which is basically is how you get into your big
Nationwide.
your big finals and stuff like that. You have one for that winner, but then you have another one that's based on not only those points. That's only half of what you get. They also take into account how well are your paint figures painted, your sportsmanship, is actually taken into. You get a score for your sportsmanship. The fact that they
That's
still,
amazing.
yeah, the fact that they hand that out to me tells me this is a game that I want to be pushing because this is something that,
Encourages.
yeah, well, and it's something that's being lost in the world today. And I think that the more we push that, the more it's going to help going forward. Um, so, and you're right. There's it's a lot more of just a cut and dry, just strategic combat. But at the same time, there's a lot of. I'm getting into the lore at this point. I'm starting to read about it. It's why I picked who I picked. I just kind of got a kick out of how they handled things. And I say I got a kick out of it, but I mean it was brutal. They basically orbitally bombarded the planet until it was just hammered, and then they sent in the ground troops. So. Um,
Which is why I'm never going to vote for you as president, because I
yeah.
know.
Well, it's the reason I will never win the lottery. I am literally one Powerball away from supervillain status, honestly, half the time. And so I'm better off just being a nice average level because it doesn't put me in a situation where I can buy power armor, you know?
But you're right that we're losing that. But again,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where um, the passion is what drives it. Because we were mentioning, or I had mentioned that the antique stores, and
Mm-hmm.
you're either doing this for a cheap buck or because you have a passion for it, and that's why I didn't get into some some things. That's why I didn't bother trying to pursue a, a store of my own, was
Yeah.
because I had no interest in this other stuff. And what kind of crappy store would I be if I had all these things that I knew nothing about?
I watched a lot of those stores through the years, as I moved place to place. Like we were everywhere from, Japan, Michigan, Utah, all over the place. And you'd see these stores pop up exactly what you're talking about. They would know one side but not the other. And inevitably they would fall. Um, it was a pretty common occurrence. There was two things that I would see. Either they wouldn't have a familiarity with one side or the other, or they would go with the idea of I'm going to buy two things, and when I sell one of those two things, I'll take that one thing and buy two more things, so now I have three things, and then the expanding inventory model. Um, while you can get away with that to some extent, you need to start out with a pretty substantial one. Otherwise, you run into the same problem. And so it gave me kind of luckily a heads up, considering when we opened up basically right in the middle of COVID out here. It that
Oh my
take
goodness.
advantage of, yeah, right, take advantage of the slow time that I had there, and that's all I made sure to do was. Granted, I wasn't the biggest thing on the block right out the gates, but I had enough that it wasn't like I was trying to, you know,
You weren't selling from a broom closet.
yeah, well, or hoping that I could sell a dungeon master's guide so I could buy a dungeon master's guide and a player's handbook so I could, so I could have those for sale, and that's the kind of level that you'd actually see at some of these startup stores.
Well, and I thought about the oh my god, I'm blanking on the president has his council, his
The cabinet.
cabinet. Thank you. And you, in theory, the way it should work is that you get top people in the respective fields, and if you had a store, you would want to have a comic book guy and a magic guy and a Warhammer guy, or you could do comics and gaming, and then fantasy and what have you. Get experts in those fields to advise you or to run that side,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how you really succeed, because in our geekdom, everything is a gateway for something else.
Oh, absolutely.
You were talking about the comics that were based on video games. The moment you read that comic book and then you find out that there's a video game, then you're going to be
I'm gonna go try it. Yeah,
right,
yeah,
or vice versa.
yeah.
If you
But
are a fan of the game and find out that there's a comic, well, crap.
High on Life was a good example of that for me. I absolutely fell in love with that book and the idea of a silent mercenary with a talking gun. And so, yeah, I am going to definitively take some time at some point in the very near future and try that game out because it looks really good.
Well, and if I'm in a store, and this, when I started at Second Impressions, it was as a volunteer because for a number of years we had nothing in the area, and I did everything by mail order. And then you can back me up. The moment you buy something and it turns out that you needed it crossed over to this title, or you cut off too soon or
Mm-hmm.
didn't pick up early enough, and then you had to track down a missing issue or get the tie-ins to it.
Well,
It's
the Fall of X and all that stuff is a great example of that. I mean, oh my, it drove Michelle just absolutely crazy trying to find all the titles, and every now and then one would slide by and it would come in. It would have that little Fall of X up in the corner, and she would just want to just throw that
scream,
book.
yeah.
Yeah,
And so I wanted a local comic book shop so that I could come in and make sure that I got all the things that I wanted.
mm-hmm.
But I also miss talking shop. And it's amazing that, you find someone that has similar interests or similar tastes. And then you start talking to like, hey, if you like this, you should try out that, and very, very easily, very casually, you can all of a sudden find yourself like, well, if you like playing this game, then you've got to try that one.
Yeah.
And it's a gateway.
Well, but you bring up a valid point in the fact that I mean, you take a look at we just look at the comic side, kind of your outlook and my outlook. If I started asking you a bunch of questions about, the old NEC comic books or First Comics, stuff like that, you're
My knowledge
probably,
base is low.
yeah, yeah. But at the same time, while I have a base knowledge of Marvel, man, most of my true knowledge is in those independents because that's what I read for the most part. Yeah, I liked my mainline story for some things, but man, I was all about Grim Jack and Hellboy, and I mean, it was
It's a matter of balance,
yeah.
and having the right cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
If you aren't familiar in this field,
You got to cover it.
you have to cover it. Either you learn it yourself or you find someone that does know it.
Yep.
So, but all in all, I read an independent book for my read, and I'll give the next issue a try. But right now, I'm not holding out high hopes. I can see where they're laying out the groundwork, but the humor wasn't there, and it's a basic story, and I can get behind that. I don't need it to be complex and
Yeah,
multi-layered, but you got to give me more than what's here.
that's fair. Awesome. And by the way, real quick before we go, I just noticed right on the front cover, that right there is a drawing. That little black circle.
I'm learning stuff with you.
So, but anyway, that's all I had. Unless you had something else in the previews one to bring up.
No, but again, the beauty of a brick and mortar store is the fact that you have something tangible that you can flip through and look ahead. We have previews and we have the League of Geeks and Longbox. But for me, again, we're that age group
Yeah.
where we grew up with something tangible, and it's way easier for me to
I
flip
like
through
having a
that
book.
than having to go through each and every screenshot on my phone and have to blow something up, or have to click here and then
Now,
expand to just read the synopsis.
that being said, all right. Now this doesn't have to do with preview stuff, but it
Chicken
definitely.
biking
I
now.
want to. I do want to plug. I've been trying out the new Overstreet
App.
cover scanner that's on their app, and I honestly, I don't. I'll go ahead and say right now, I don't get paid for this or anything like that for saying it, but I've actually been really impressed with it. I mean, it's on a level of like the TCG scanner, being able to get you accuracy. I mean, it's not quite as fast, but I mean, it, considering the database you're having to deal with Overstreet, and especially considering, at least with Magic, you have some other specific things that it can key in on with the algorithm. With the comics, you don't have that all the time,
Right.
because you've got pre-code, you've got pre-UPC, you've got all kinds of crap
Or
going
the
on.
fact that there's, the direct edition versus the newsstand versus, you know,
Yeah, variant like I've scanned multiple variant covers, and it will find the variant covers as well.
or or the promotional mail away, the brought to you by AIM toothpaste or Planned
Mm-hmm.
Parenthood or the Dallas Times rodeo, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That there are so many goofy things out there, and comics have been published for 100 years, and it's still one of those things where there is such a backlog of
Yeah.
stuff. Being able to scan that is impressive.
Yeah. And so, like I said, I'm happy with that too. So it's definitely worth checking out, and I'm hoping that their capability just keeps increasing, and to the point where you can really just keep your collection there.
That would be something, but man alive, that would require a lot of storage and data.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's all I've got for the night.
Likewise, um, I guess if you have any questions, comments, or if you want to discuss the fictional characters that had an influence on your life, by all means, comment below. Thank you and have a good night.